I'm Kat Burdine, and I sabotage modes of making to make failed prints and objects in order to think about socially assigned narratives and how we carry them. A lot of the processes that I'm using in my studio, they're technical and there's sort of a way that things are supposed to happen. And by inserting new parameters or undoing certain parameters, the object then becomes its own thing through the process and through the sabotage. So then the failure is that it doesn't exist within the expectations of the outcome, and it sort of creates its own space around that failure. It has been a really freeing, sort of in my own investigations, a really freeing understanding to not have to sort of exist within the parameters of success. And so when does that become a strategy, and what new spaces does that open up? The reason that we're here, or I'm here, when I moved to Cleveland and was sort of looking for some kind of queer scene or some kind of even just a place to hang out, the only way I was pointed was to say oh, that space is gone. So it was to a non-space, right? And so the idea of this corner of 29th and Detroit became really interesting. There was just this void, right? And the community was like, oh, we lost that space and we don't have another space. The corner of 29th and Detroit, there was a time in which it was sort of like the gay community's resting place, right? Or it was the home of that. And there were various locations and bars, and there was sort of this bar complex. Then it was purchased, that was sort of turned over and then rebranded into Hingetown, right? So there was this kind of acute change. The flags are the sort of cornerstone or capstone, or I guess the flags are central to the work. The outside flag is installed in position over sort of the old gay bar complex. It was kind of the epicenter of the location or of the area. There was this first sort of level of erasure, removal just through purchase, right? And then there's been this kind of second attempt to invite people back in and say, actually, this is like a queer-friendly place. But it's different to be invited back in than it is to have ownership of a place. And so I'm thinking about the conditions in which the bodies that have passed through that space have existed and how they've been asked to perform or not respond to those conditions. So the flag on the roof, it doesn't sort of respond to its conditions, right? So it's called holding ground. And the idea that it is an object, flags are meant to be legible, they're meant to be seen, their whole function is to project and announce themselves. What does it mean when a flag doesn't perform its function and we can't read it and we actually will never know what it says? And what does that say in a space that I think queerness sort of operates in the same way? I've tried to bring the condition sort of inside. So on the projection, it's actually a projection of the flag, but it focuses on the movement around the flag and the way the wind is kind of bending the flag back and forth. And then on the iPads, it's the wind speed. It's the current wind speed and direction of the wind in Cleveland. Its counterpoint, or its buddy, is the flag called Expected to Dance. And so that's kind of the second movement in this, where by being a guest or being sort of invited back in, there's an expectation for performance, right? So how does then this flag perform or not perform, or what are our expectations of the object? Is that something that it can do either in its nature, or is it going to always sort of resist the performance you're expecting of it? You sort of start at the threshold or the greeting, and there's the lighter, right? Which I think that can be a signifier, but also it's just when you walk into a space and someone reaches out and it's an act of care, right? To sort of offer to light their cigarette or offer to support them. And then the threshold, the 2x4s are cast out of the scraps from the flag Expected to Dance. They spoke to transitional spaces, so either the becoming or the undoing of a space, but they also had a history, right? So that you sort of can't build on top of them without the history being embedded in them. So the idea that they're cast out of sort of the byproduct of another thing, so they have that material history. So you pass the threshold and you're greeted with slouch, which is sort of the idea of the posture, right? So how sort of the bodies that are posturing in space and the weight of those bodies in space. And then in thinking about care and support, I think many people that I spoke to spoke about this sort of idea of intimacies and carrying, and it's not the story you get from the articles written about the new Hingetown, right? And so I wanted to have a piece that spoke to that, and that's where the sort of rubber band around the two pieces comes in. So it's this embrace, it is intimate in some ways, but in that we can't read it as a viewer, right? We actually don't know sort of what the two frames are. But the piece on the wall is hanging from a nail, which is holding everything, right? So eventually that front frame may fall. I'm surprised how little tension it like needs one more twist in the rubber band for me to be like, yes, that's on there. At some point there will probably be a failure, but to me it speaks to the way that we're sort of holding each other up, and those spaces are necessary to support each other. And then coming back through, this back part of the gallery is fairly quiet, and I think it was necessary to do that because of the flag expected to dance. And so I wanted stillness is like a really hard thing to work with. At least it was for me, because I think I'm usually sort of interested in less still things. So stillness became something that I was interested in embedding in the back part of the gallery. And then tucked in a corner, there is the piece, A Wide and Toothy Grin. We're sort of at our best when we're kind of able to be mischievous and have that sort of toothy grin. And so I wanted to embed some way this gesture towards unsanctioned ownership or presence. And so carving something isn't easy, and typically when you do it, it's because you really want to do it. You have an impulse, you have this strong desire, and you never have the right tool, so it becomes this kind of arduous task. Somehow you've committed to it, right? So you have to finish. And so I wanted this moment to inscribe and to make present your presence, right? And to make it, in this case, semi-permanent. That's why it's a gesture, but to make yourself into sort of a claim of space again.